I never thought silence could be so expensive until they handed me that envelope and said it was just procedure. I am Claire Weston. And at 41, I thought I'd seen every corporate maneuver in the book. 12 years at Stratexan Partners had taught me to read between the lines of executive speak, to decode the subtle politics of quarterly reviews, and to navigate the treacherous waters of office hierarchies. But nothing had prepared me for that Tuesday morning when they tried to erase me from existence. The meeting invitation arrived at 9:13 a.m. with the innocuous subject line, Strategic HR Alignment. Anyone who's worked in corporate America for more than 5 minutes knows that phrase is corporate speak for someone's getting fired. I stared at my computer screen, watching the cursor blink in the reply field. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, abandoned next to a stack of quarterly reports I'd been reviewing for our biggest client presentation next week. I knocked on the conference room door at exactly 9:30. Greg from Human Resources sat at the far end of the table, his usual confident demeanor replaced by the uncomfortable fidgeting of someone delivering bad news. Amanda, my direct supervisor and supposed mentor for the past 3 years, couldn't meet my eyes. She studied her manicured fingernails as if they held the secrets of the universe. Claire, please sit down, Greg said, gesturing to the chair across from him. A manila folder sat in front of his spot, thick with documents I hadn't seen before. This is about restructuring, isn't it? I asked, settling into the chair. No point in pretending I didn't know why I was there. Amanda finally looked up. The company is moving in a new direction. We're consolidating several positions in the External Affairs division. Her voice carried the rehearsed quality of someone who'd practiced this speech in the mirror. Greg opened the folder and slid a document across the polished table. We're offering a severance package that we believe is fair and comprehensive. I scanned the first page, 2 weeks of pay. After 12 years of building client relationships, managing crisis communications, and working weekends that bled into my personal life, they were offering me 2 weeks. The insult burned more than the actual termination. This is your idea of fair, I asked, looking up from the document. It's standard for restructuring situations, Greg replied. Additionally, we'll provide a positive reference and extend your health insurance for 30 days. I flipped through the pages, my anger building with each clause. The document was dense with legal language, but one section made me pause. It was a comprehensive release of claims, requiring me to waive any right to sue the company for wrongful termination, discrimination, or any other employment-related issues. You want me to sign away my right to challenge this decision? It's standard language, Amanda interjected. Nothing personal, just legal protection for both parties. I set the document down. I need time to review this. Greg's expression tightened. We'd prefer to have this resolved today. The longer these situations drag out, the more complicated they become. How complicated could it be you're firing me? I kept my voice level, professional. Surely I can have a day to read through 20 pages of legal text? Of course, Amanda said quickly. Take the time you need. But Claire, this really is a generous offer. In this economy, with companies cutting costs everywhere, I stood up, gathering the papers. I'll be in touch. Walking back to my office felt surreal. Colleagues glanced at me with the mixture of curiosity and sympathy reserved for the recently terminated. Word traveled fast in our open-plan workspace. I packed my personal items into a banker's box while my computer was remotely wiped, watching 12 years of work disappear from my screen in real time. That evening, I spread the severance agreement across my kitchen table next to my original employment contract. I'd kept meticulous records throughout my career, a habit that had saved me more than once during performance reviews and client disputes. As I read through both documents, looking for any leverage I might have missed, my phone buzzed with a text from my former colleague Jessica. Can't believe they let you go. Everyone's talking about it. This place won't be the same. I was about to reply when a phrase in my original contract caught my attention. Buried in Section 12 subsection C was a clause I'd completely forgotten about. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, all unvested equity shares shall immediately vest, and become the property of the departing employee. My heart rate spiked. I read the clause 3 more times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. When I joined Stratexan 12 years ago, the company was much smaller, more desperate for talent. They'd offered me a small equity stake as part of my compensation package, something that seemed insignificant at the time. I'd assumed those shares had been diluted to worthlessness over the years as the company grew and brought in new investors. I rifled through my filing cabinet until I found the folder labeled Stratexan Legal. Inside were copies of every contract amendment, stock option agreement, and bonus structure change I'd signed over the years. As I traced through the documents chronologically, a picture began to emerge that made my hands shake. The equity clause had never been formally revoked, while my base salary had increased over the years and my bonus structure had changed. This particular provision had remained untouched through every contract renewal. More importantly, Stratexan had gone through 2 major funding rounds in the past 5 years, significantly increasing the company's valuation. I grabbed my laptop and started researching. Public records showed that Stratexan had raised $50 million in Series C funding just 8 months ago, valuing the company at $400 million. If my original equity percentage had been preserved through all the dilution protections spelled out in my contract, I could be looking at a significant sum. The next morning, I called in sick to avoid the awkward final day rituals most terminated employees endure. Instead, I spent the day researching employment lawyers in the city. After reading reviews and checking credentials, I settled on Lena Rowe, who ran a boutique firm specializing in executive employment disputes. Her website was understated but professional, and several articles mentioned her success in cases involving stock option disputes. Lena's office was in a converted brownstone downtown, far from the gleaming corporate towers where most employment lawyers practiced. She was younger than I'd expected, probably mid-30s, with short auburn hair and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she didn't waste time on small talk. "Tell me about your situation," she said after we'd settled into her office. I walked her through the termination, the severance offer, and my discovery of the equity clause. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Do you have copies of all your contracts?" I handed her the folder I'd brought. She spent the next 20 minutes reading through the documents, her expression growing more interested with each page. "This is remarkable," she finally said. "Your original contract includes standard anti-dilution protections that were common in smaller companies during that era. Most employees don't understand what they're signing, and honestly, most companies forget about these clauses until they become problems. So the clause is valid, not only valid, but enforceable. You were terminated without cause. They called it restructuring, which is corporate speak for, we don't want to pay severance for cause termination. Under your contract, that means your unvested shares should immediately vest." I leaned forward. "What are we talking about in terms of value?" Lena pulled out a calculator and started running numbers based on the funding information I'd found. "If my calculations are correct, and assuming your equity percentage has been preserved through the dilution protections in your contract, you're looking at somewhere between $1.2 and $1.8 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd expected maybe enough to cover a few months of expenses while I job hunted, not enough to buy a house. "What do we need to do?" "First, we send them a formal demand letter. We'll outline the contract violation and give them an opportunity to resolve this quietly. If they refuse, we file suit. Given the strength of your position, I suspect they'll want to settle." 3 days later, Lena's demand letter was delivered to Stratexan's corporate headquarters at 9:01 a.m. on Monday morning. She'd crafted it perfectly, professional but unmistakably threatening, with enough legal citations to make clear we weren't bluffing. I spent the morning trying to distract myself with job applications and networking emails, but my phone remained stubbornly silent. No panicked calls from Amanda, no desperate attempts at negotiation from Greg. By lunch, I was starting to wonder if they were simply ignoring us. Then Jessica texted, "Holy shit, Claire. Whatever you did has the entire executive team in emergency meetings. Greg looks like he's about to have a heart attack." At 3:47 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed Stratexon's main number. "Claire, this is Marcus Webb." The CEO's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "I think we need to talk." "About what, Marcus?" "You know damn well what about. Your lawyer's letter is sitting on my desk. And my legal team is telling me you might have a case." "I don't might have a case. I have a valid contract that your company violated." There was a long pause. "How much do you want?" "I want what I'm owed under my contract. Nothing more, nothing less." "Claire, be reasonable. That contract was written 12 years ago when the company was worth a fraction of what it is today. Nobody could have anticipated this kind of valuation." "That's not my problem. Marcus, your HR department should have reviewed my contract before terminating me." Another pause. "We need to meet. Can you come in tomorrow at 10? My lawyer and I will be there." The next morning, Lena and I walked into Stratexon's conference room to find a small army waiting for us. Marcus Webb sat at the head of the table, flanked by the company's general counsel, an external attorney I didn't recognize, Amanda, and a very uncomfortable-looking Greg. "Let's get straight to the point," Marcus said after perfunctory introductions. "My team has reviewed Ms. Weston's contract, and while we disagree with your interpretation of the equity clause, we're prepared to discuss a reasonable settlement." Lena opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Before we discuss settlement, I'd like to establish some facts." She began laying out documents on the table. "These are copies of every contract amendment, stock option agreement, and equity-related document my client signed during her 12 years of employment." The external attorney, who'd introduced himself as David Chen, leaned forward to examine the papers. After several minutes of reading, his expression grew grim. "As you can see," Lena continued, "the equity clause in question was never modified or revoked. Furthermore, the anti-dilution provisions in the original contract were specifically designed to protect early employees through subsequent funding rounds." Marcus looked to his legal team. The general counsel, a thin woman named Patricia Santos, whispered something in his ear that made his jaw clench. "What exactly are you looking for?" Marcus asked. "Full vesting of my client's equity shares as specified in her contract, calculated at the company's current valuation based on the Series C funding round." David Chen pulled out his own calculator and started running numbers. The room fell silent except for the soft clicking of calculator keys. "That's approximately $1.6 million, he finally said. Marcus's face flushed red. "That's absolutely ridiculous. Claire, you were a good employee, but you weren't worth $60 million to this company." "The contract isn't based on my worth to the company," I replied calmly. "It's based on what you agreed to pay me 12 years ago." "We're prepared to offer a more reasonable settlement," Patricia interjected. $200,000 plus an extended non-disclosure agreement." Lena didn't even consult me before responding. "That's not acceptable. My client is entitled to the full value of her equity under the contract." "Be practical," Marcus said. "Claire needs to work in this industry. Word gets around about difficult employees who sue their former companies." The implied threat hung in the air. Lena's expression didn't change, but I could see her pen tightening in her grip. "Mr. Webb, are you suggesting that my client's future employment prospects might be damaged if she exercises her legal rights?" "I'm suggesting that business is built on relationships, and some relationships are more valuable than others." "I see." Lena closed her folder with a sharp snap. "In that case, I think we need to consider all of our options." She turned to me. "Claire, given what we've just heard, I think we need to discuss whether a quiet settlement is really in your best interests." I knew what she was getting at. "What other options do we have?" "Well, if the company refuses to honor your contract, we could file suit. That would make this dispute public record. We could also file complaints with the SEC regarding potential securities violations. And if Mr. Webb's comments suggest a pattern of retaliation against employees who assert their rights." She let the sentence hang. The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus exchanged worried glances with his legal team. "Now wait a minute," David Chen said, "There's no need to escalate this. We're all reasonable people here." "Are we?" Lena asked. "Because your client just threatened my client's future employment for exercising her legal rights? That sounds like retaliation to me." Patricia Santos leaned over to whisper urgently in Marcus's ear. Whatever she said made his face go pale. "Let's take a 15-minute break," Marcus announced. Lena and I stepped into the hallway while the Stratixon team huddled in the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see heated discussions and lots of pointing at documents. "How do you think it's going?" I asked. "Better than I expected. They're scared, which means they know they don't have a strong position." The retaliation comment was a gift. It gives us additional leverage if they try to lowball us. When we reconvened, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Marcus looked defeated, and his legal team had the grim expressions of people delivering bad news to their client. "We've discussed your position," Patricia said carefully, "and we're prepared to make a more substantial offer." "We're listening," Lena replied. $800,000 plus a mutual non-disclosure agreement. Lena looked at me. I shook my head slightly. "That's still not acceptable. The contract is clear. My client is entitled to full vesting of her equity shares. We're not negotiating the value down from what she's legally owed." Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "This is extortion. You know damn well that contract was never intended to give a mid-level employee ownership of a multi-million-dollar company." "The contract says what it says," I replied evenly. "If you didn't want to honor it, you shouldn't have signed it." David Chen cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could structure a payment plan. The full amount paid out over several years. Cash payment within 30 days, Lena said firmly. "My client has been without income for 2 weeks already due to your client's breach of contract." The next hour was brutal. Stratixon's team made increasingly desperate attempts to reduce the settlement amount or add restrictive conditions. They proposed consulting agreements that would effectively make me an unpaid advisor for 2 years. They suggested donating part of the settlement to charity for tax benefits. They even floated the idea of giving me a different job title and pretending the termination never happened. Lena shot down every proposal with the patience of someone who'd done this many times before. My client was wrongfully terminated, and she's entitled to the equity compensation specified in her contract. Everything else is irrelevant. Finally, Patricia Santos stood up. "We need to caucus with our client privately." The Stratixon team filed out of the conference room, leaving Lena and me alone. "They're going to pay," Lena said quietly. "The question is whether they'll do it gracefully, or if we'll have to drag them through court first." 20 minutes later, the team returned. Marcus looked like he'd aged a decade in the past few hours. "We'll pay the full amount," he said through gritted teeth. $1.6 million, cash payment within 30 days. "Plus attorney's fees," Lena added. Marcus nodded reluctantly. "And no non-disclosure agreement," I said. "If anyone asks why I left Stratixon, I'm free to tell them the truth." "Fine. Whatever. Let's just get this over with." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and wire transfer confirmations. Lena earned every penny of her fee, ensuring that every I was dotted and every T was crossed in the settlement agreement. She also insisted on penalty clauses in case Stratixon tried to delay or reduce the payment. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 month after my original termination, I received an email from my bank confirming a wire transfer of $1,747,000. I stared at the number on my phone screen, reading it over and over until the digits lost all meaning. I didn't throw a party or make any grand gestures. Instead, I walked to the coffee shop down the street from my apartment and ordered the same latte I'd been drinking for the past 12 years. I sat by the window and watched people hurry past on their way to jobs that might disappear tomorrow. Contracts that might contain forgotten clauses, severance packages that might be insulting lowball offers. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Heard you and the company reached an agreement. Greg got fired yesterday. Rumor is they're reviewing all termination procedures to avoid future Claire situations. You're a legend." I deleted the message thread and then did something I'd been looking forward to for weeks. I opened my email and permanently deleted the folder labeled Stratexon Partners. They tried to erase me. Instead, I became the most expensive lesson they ever learned about reading the fine print. 6 months later, I was having lunch with a former colleague who'd also left Stratexon when she mentioned that the company had hired a new chief compliance officer whose primary job was reviewing all employee contracts for legacy liability issues. Apparently, my case had prompted a comprehensive audit that uncovered similar problematic clauses in dozens of other employment agreements. "They've spent more on legal fees fixing these contracts than they paid you," she said, laughing. I raised my glass. Here's to small print and big consequences. The funny thing about corporate revenge is that the best kind doesn't feel like revenge at all. It feels like justice. They offered me 2 weeks' pay to disappear quietly, to accept their version of my worth and move on without making waves. Instead, I forced them to honor the promise they'd made 12 years earlier, when they needed me more than I needed them. I never went back to corporate life. The settlement gave me the freedom to be selective about my next move, and I eventually started my own consulting firm helping other executives review their employment contracts. It turns out there are a lot of forgotten clauses out there, waiting for the right moment to surface. But that's another story entirely.